white people who practice hoodoo, but it's certainly not what the enslaved people did. There's different kinds of hoodoo. Even there's poor white Appalachian hoodoo,
Wow.
but I would argue that it all begins with the African people on that ship who are looking for some sort of way to bridge the gap between. Oh, and one more thing that I also love that there were Christians on the slave ships, right? It's like, oh, well, Christianity is an African religion because
That's right.
this Christian church is in East Africa, right?
Yep.
But then they're finding that a lot of Africans, not that many Africans came to the United States or what became the United States, but many that did came from a region that is now called Congo, not
Yep.
the same as the DRC. And that region was Christianized in the 1400s. So
Yes.
so we have, and this is why I love to study this. We have Christians, we have Africans, we have Muslims, we have Jews, real diversity. If we could realize that, and instead of picking and taking these sides, that sort of the spirit that emerges from that, just that recognition that even under the worst conditions, we had this beautiful tapestry, this diversity, and we can talk to each other. To me, that's unlike any other group, because these white people were fighting over religious difference. Well, you're Catholic and you're Anglican, and I hate you, and you're the Puritans.
Yep.
They didn't have that choice, these enslaved people, because they had to somehow get along. All of that changes after emancipation, of course, and so that's the story I like to tell when I tell the story. And I think it's something that more Black folk need to hear. There aren't that many people who and there are some wonderful books. I try to write books that aren't so academic, that they're accessible. But it's kind of hard, because it seems to me that these are the days where people are sort of taking sides, and even in my family. And I got to tell you, Kayla, I love all people. I love all religions. I am one of these love child people. Even in my family, I have Christians who are more fundamentalist about it, and they draw a line there. They say, no magic, no voodoo, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Oh, I'm fine with all of that, but it's sort of my way or the highway, or they say it's God's way. But then what do you do with the Muslim who was sitting next to you on that slave ship? What do you do with the Ifa practitioner who is, trying to help you as you're in that stinking slip? Well, they just didn't know Jesus. It's actually, there's a ridiculous argument, or, so, and that's my frustration today. But I truly love everyone. I really do.
Listen, I understand. African, right? Judaism, that's something that you have done extensive research on. You wrote in your second book on, like what you said. And, when it comes to the Bible, sometimes I get so frustrated when people view it as like this white man's text. Me, however, it's like when you further read, I view it as like to me, an actual African text. I don't view it as just something that a white person wrote. Of course, we can talk about Jesus, him being described as Black in the Bible, or King Solomon. I mean, all the way through, right? And recently, right, it has gone viral of T.D. Jakes finally admitting in a sermon recently about the African legacy in the Bible. But if you can, please, can we just expound upon that when it comes to Africa's legacy, when it comes to Judaism, and also when it comes to the Bible as well?
Yeah, well, the book that I actually edited with someone else was looking at how African Americans understood themselves in relation to not so much Judaism, but in relation to the Hebrews of the Bible.
Right,
Because
exactly.
that's something most people don't realize, that the Bible, there's, at least the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, there's no Jews really. There's Jews and there's Israelites.
Exactly. Yep.
So Black people take those stories and identify with it. Now, someone's sitting here saying, yeah, but that's not what really happened. But so much of our story as a people is mythic. And what I mean by that, myth is not something that's not true. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that is such a powerful tale that it
Mm,
becomes true. I tell my students this, whether or not you're a Christian or not, is the story of a man rising from the dead after
mm.
being nailed on a cross, is it a true story or is it a myth? And my students look at me like this and
Wow.
think, and they're like, well, it's a myth, but it's true. And I'm like, exactly.
Mm,
For the Christian, it is mythical. It is the foundational tale. Or even, the stories of walking on the water, any miracle story. They're powerful stories. But to some extent, it don't matter whether they're real or not.
mm,
I don't know whether those Africans flew back. All right. I don't know whether they were saying they flew back in their consciousness or they sprouted.
mm,
That's the power of myth. So when Black people identified with the Israelites and the Hebrews, it was a mythic identification because they saw
mm,
themselves as those slaves that were in Egypt. And that's where it gets kind of tricky, right? Because Egyptians, as we know, are Black people. So we're the Black Egyptians enslaving the African Israelites. It doesn't matter because it is a
mm,
mythic sort of frame
mm-hmm.
to understand the story and to identify so much with that it's
Mm,
true.
mm,
We were slaves in
mm,
in in that foreign land,
mm-hmm.
in Israel. So that's what I'll say about
For sure.
Judaism. I get
Mm-hmm.
calls on that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new book that came out that and it's actually it's gotten to be more controversial because people are claiming, well, they're Jews. And some
Mm-hmm.
people say, well, yeah, anyone can be a Jew.
Mm-hmm.
And I have Jewish friends. I have a rabbi friend who says anyone can
Mm-hmm.
be a Jew. And then
Mm-hmm.
others say, no, it's part of the bloodline.
Mm-hmm.
That's the mess for us to figure out. That's
Mm-hmm.
less interesting to me. I'm interested in what is that power of belief that makes you become that. That
Mm-hmm.
what is that thing that made Frederick Douglass fight back?
Yes, exactly.
What is the thing that gives you the impetus to run away? Or as Gullah Jack knew, to face those people who were going to kill him and later did. What
Mm,
is that? So some would say, well, that's God, that's Jesus. I'm saying it's more than it's different than that. It could be
yes.
God and Jesus and this other thing. So,
Mm,
but the Bible, you're right, there's so much more. And I wish that we gave our Black Bible scholars some love, more
mm,
love, our Black theologians more love. They're in
mm-hmm.
the trenches. It's good that story you told me about TD Jakes. I didn't know about it, but why does it
Mm-hmm.
take so long? I mean,
That's what I said too.
it's like
Yeah.
there's something happening right now where we're starting to recognize who we are, and I'm
Mm,
for it. But I wanted this back in the 20th century.
understood.
Yeah, but we need to give our Black scholars of theology, and I'm not a theologian, the people
Mm-hmm.
who are engaged with the churches, more love and support because they're the ones who are saying, okay, Jesus is Black, and this is
Mm,
what it is. All right.
mm-hmm.
Jesus is or the Bible is an African
Mm-hmm.
document, and
Mm-hmm.
this is what it means. Because I think that would actually enrich our
Mm,
Christianity. So,
yes.
yeah.
Yes. No, that is a great point. And the Book of Clarence, have you ever seen that film before?
No, my students told me about that. Yeah.
Excellent film. So when
Yeah.
it comes to myth, right, when it comes to resistance, all of those factors was exposed throughout that film, right? Of seeing an all black cast, seeing black Hebrews, right, of course, and seeing them be oppressed. And it was just like the cops today, right?
Yeah.
Clarence's mother, seeing him crucified, felt like Mary, of course, and seeing our own black mothers, right? When you see a George Floyd,
Yeah.
Breonna Taylor, right? So from seeing that film, I think that ties into Frederick Douglass,
Yeah.
Mark Vesey, right? Bella Jack, and I think so often we get this overall like misnomer of, hey, these people during slavery times are people who were so docile that they were being indoctrinated, all of that. However, from hearing you talk about the AME church, that they were true like revolutionaries and not just sitting aside, right?
Yeah.
For our generation, younger people, when we are taught about slavery, we just always think, uh-huh,
Alexa, stop. I have my alarm. I'm sorry. You might have to cut.
no,
I'm so Alexa, stop. I love this technology, but it's
Yeah.
like it's annoying.
Listen, I get it. It could be wonky.
No, there's one thing I actually, when I was coming to the office, I said I have to mention this to you, because it was on my mind. I'm looking for the Black Christ. I'm
Hmm.
looking for the Black Christ in the 20th century, because now we have Black Christ. We have, image, and people are starting to talk about, oh, Black Jesus was Palestinian,
Right.
blah, blah, blah,
Right.
blah.
Right. Right.
But I'm looking for the Black Christ. And I grew up in the 20th century. I grew up in the
Hmm.
1900s. You can't find the Black Christ.
Mm.
And there is a book that I would recommend to everyone to read. It is by one of our esteemed late Black theologians by the name of James Cone. And he was a Christian theologian. He was the first Christian theologian at Union Seminary. And it's called The Cross and the Lynching Tree.
Mm.
And the book says that if we think of Christ, and he wrote a book a long time ago in the 60s that said, Jesus was a revolutionary, which he was.
Mm.
Jesus was Black, and that's where the white people lost their minds in the 60s. He said, I may not even mean this literally, even though you
Hmm.
can, but he is going against the system.
Right.
He is tortured for it. But his last book, which was really, really the profound part, if you think about lynching, all right. If you think about the Black body and how
Hmm.
it was tortured and broken, and maybe not hung up on the cross, but hung up, right?
Mm.
Does Christ come to mind? And in some ways, and so he goes into the history of lynching, which I don't think we talk about enough in this country, right?
Mm.
And if Governor DeSantis has his way, we will never talk about lynching, all right? But how the lynching of innocent people is such a parallel with what happened with Jesus Christ, all right? That and he in this book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, he maps it theologically onto the lynching. All
Wow.
right. And so what you have is a Black man on
Mm.
the Black Christ. Now, I just even saying that, I know some people would
Mm.
lose their minds, but listen to it, what he's saying, that if we believe that a man took upon the sin, all
Wow.
right, and suffered in the most horrendous ways, and we know that Black people suffered, and we have so much documentation of lynching, right? And I actually think there's a museum now of how ritualized it was, how
Mm-hmm.
they would
Yep.
march people.
Yep.
Why wouldn't we conceive of Christ as a Black man
Wow.
instead of
Yeah.
the golden? I'm working on your audience is going to find this really goofy, but
Mm.
everybody's going to want my book when it's written. I'm looking at comic books right now,
Mm.
and I'm looking at religious comic books or
Mm.
religion and comic books, and I explain more of that on my website. But all of the religious comic books that I'm finding from the 1900s, because that's the 20th century, Jesus has the blonde, and it's the blonde hair, and
Mm-hmm. Yep.
it is such an it's such a jarringly impossible vision. Whether
Mm.
or not he was Black and he had
Mm.
the nappy hair, to see God as a blonde white man, as in such a conventional way, it's actually hard for me to see it. That
Wow.
this, and then you say, well, who did that?
Mm.
And so there's a couple of scholars who have a book called The Color of Christ. That's
Yep.
another good book for you. So
Yep.
so these two books, Crossing the Lynching Tree, The Color of Christ. And then like it's almost like magic that people
Mm.
actually see God
Mm.
blonde. First of all, it's impossible. Anyone, even little kids tell you that now, but
Mm.
this is what it was. So, but do we call that evil? To
Wow.
create the image of God as this white, blonde, so the comic book thing is I'm sort of tracing these images not only of, Jesus, but any kind of religion, Black religion. So the religion that comes up, if you were to guess, and I don't know if you're a comic book fan, but I'm mainly looking at like the golden age. If you were to guess what most Black people are pictured doing in these comic books, and I'm talking about the superheroes and
Mm.
what religion do you think it would be? It's not Christianity.
Oh,
It's
it's
a
not Christianity.
it's a made up religion called voodoo. So,
Mm.
and I said, what, I'm reading these old comics from the 1930s and 40s. I keep saying voodoo. I'm like, what is it?
Wow.
What is it? So I'm like, I got to write about that. Because when people
Mm.
ask me, they're like, what do you write? I'm saying comic books because they had such an influence, especially in the 1940s, on a whole generation's consciousness. And what they see and what they tell us is that Black people didn't have religion, or if they did, they're like, they're very minstrel and they're singing and they're
Hmm.
dancing that. When they did have religion, though, they had this thing called voodoo, and it's
Mm.
and and it's such an interesting, but it's like the white Jesus face.
Wow.
We just take it for granted that
Wow.
that's what Black people do. So
Mm.
when I say I'm looking at comics, I get the eye rolls, but I'll tell you, I'm the only one who's doing this, and
Mm.
it's not child's play because
Mm.
it's in those images you can actually see the visceral fear of Black people, the hatred of Black people, and it's astounding. It's like, and so but when I think about the Black Christ, that's kind of where I go. It's like even little kids know that now.
Mm.
Where did they get the impunity to imagine God, the Son of God, as a white man?
Mm. Wow.
All right, so that and that kind of got me, and I'll just say that quickly because I have to go. When I decided to go to grad school, I have a book on my shelf back there. It's called The Religions of Man. And when I was a kid, I loved to read about cultures and religions. And there it is in a scholarly book. Jesus was a tanned white man, it says.
Mm. Wow.
Is it true? Is it myth? Is it possible? But that's
Mm.
what got me to say, that don't even sound right. So,
Mm.
and I said, I got to study this. And I didn't know that you could study religions like this, but my family really gave me the freedom to pursue whatever intellectual, whatever the life of the mind is. And I think I don't believe that Jesus was a tanned white man. That doesn't
Right.
even sound right.
At all. Not at all.
But that's the scholarly authority. So that's why I went to study religions, that there were some things that are truths, there are
Hmm.
some things that are interpretations of
Yeah.
truths. And I really wanted to tell the story of Black America and
Hmm.
and the different truths as well as the different myths that and that's why I did this. I had no idea you could do it for a living though.
Wow.